In the middle of a busy corporate parking lot, a janitor drops his mop bucket and yells with all his strength. "Don't get in the car." The CEO freezes, 1 foot inches away from the sleek black sedan. Gasps ripple through the onlookers. Why would a janitor dare to shout at the company's most powerful figure? Seconds later, everyone would understand, and no one would ever see him the same way again. Mark adjusted the strap of his worn backpack as he stepped into the gleaming corporate building, mop bucket in one hand, a small lunchbox in the other. It was early morning, and the corridors still smelled faintly of polish and fresh coffee from the executive floor. Most people barely noticed him as they brushed past in their expensive suits, their minds filled with meetings and deadlines. To them, Mark was invisible, a man who emptied bins, wiped floors, and blended into the background. But to his 7-year-old daughter, Lily, he was everything. Every shift, he carried a small photo of her tucked inside his shirt pocket. Whenever fatigue threatened to drag him down, one look at her smiling face reminded him why he pushed through. He wasn't just working for himself, he was building a future for her. Lily was bright, full of dreams, and Mark vowed she'd never feel the weight of struggle the way he had. Though his role was humble, Mark approached it with quiet pride. He greeted the security guards warmly each morning, held doors open for busy interns, and left the floors so spotless they reflected the overhead lights like glass. Some executives gave him polite nods, but most never even looked his way. It didn't bother him much, respect wasn't in titles or paychecks. It was in the way you treated people when no one was watching. Still, there were moments when he felt the sting of invisibility. He'd hear snippets of conversations about promotions, lavish vacations, and children being sent to elite schools. Mark would smile quietly to himself, thinking of Lily's hand-drawn notes she slipped into his lunchbox, little hearts and "I love you, Daddy," scrawled in crayon. To him, that was worth more than any promotion. That morning, as he moved through the parking lot with a trash bag slung over one shoulder, his eyes sharpened instinctively. Years of working nights in rough neighborhoods had taught him to pay attention to details others missed. He noticed when something felt off, an unlocked door, a misplaced bag, or a nervous glance. He had learned that danger often hid in plain sight. Mark didn't know it yet, but this ordinary morning, with his mop and bucket and quiet smile, would soon become extraordinary. His instincts, sharpened by love for his daughter and a lifetime of struggle, were about to change everything. It was nearing lunchtime, and Mark had stepped outside the building to toss a bag of trash into the dumpster. The sun was high, casting sharp shadows across the parking lot, where polished cars gleamed like trophies lined up in neat rows. Employees hurried in and out, some rushing for coffee, others chatting as they headed to lunch meetings. To most, it was just another ordinary day. But to Mark, something unusual immediately caught his attention. Near the edge of the lot, a sleek black sedan sat idling with its windows slightly rolled down. Inside, 2 men lingered. They weren't dressed like the usual corporate visitors, no ties, no laptops, no signs of belonging. One tapped his fingers nervously on the steering wheel, while the other scanned the building's entrance with sharp, restless eyes. Mark paused, his janitor's uniform slightly damp from the morning's work. He could have shrugged it off, after all, people waited in cars all the time. But something didn't sit right. His gut, that instinct honed from years of watching over Lily, told him there was more to this than idle waiting. He leaned casually against his mop handle, pretending to adjust his shoe, but in reality, his eyes stayed fixed on the car. Then he noticed her. Across the lot, the company's CEO, Ms. Reynolds, was walking toward her car. She was poised and confident as always, her phone pressed to her ear while she rummaged through her bag for her keys. Her luxury vehicle, parked a few spaces from the suspicious sedan, glimmered in the sun. The men in the black car suddenly stiffened. The one in the passenger seat leaned forward, his hand disappearing under his jacket. The driver's door clicked open, just a fraction, as though he was preparing to step out. Mark's heart raced. He didn't have all the facts, but every alarm in his body screamed danger. He thought of Lily. What if it were her walking toward a car while strangers lurked nearby? He wouldn't hesitate for a second. And now, he couldn't hesitate either. Clutching his mop handle like a staff, Mark's jaw tightened. His eyes darted from MS. Reynolds to the sedan. He didn't know exactly what was about to happen, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty: he had to act. What he did in the next few seconds could change everything. Mark's pulse thundered in his ears as he watched Ms. Reynolds step closer to her car. The black sedan's engine gave a low growl, and in that instant, the passenger door cracked open wider. A man's boot touched the pavement. His movements were subtle, calculated, but Mark knew predatory intent when he saw it. He couldn't stay silent. Dropping the trash bag, Mark cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted with all the force his lungs could muster. "Don't get in the car." The words ripped across the parking lot like a lightning bolt. Startled employees turned their heads. Ms. Reynolds froze mid-step, her car keys dangling from her fingers. She blinked, confused, glancing back at the janitor who had just yelled at her in front of everyone. For a heartbeat, she looked almost insulted. But then she noticed it too. The black sedan's door had swung fully open. The man inside was already stepping out, his hand glinting with something metallic, something that didn't belong in a corporate parking lot. Her stomach dropped. Mark didn't hesitate. He sprinted forward, placing himself between Ms. Reynolds and the men. His worn-out sneakers slapped against the asphalt as he gripped his mop handle like a makeshift weapon. "Get back," he barked at her, eyes locked on the strangers. His body trembled, but his stance was steady, protective, unyielding. The men, realizing they'd been exposed, panicked. The driver slammed the car into gear, the tires screeching violently against the pavement. The passenger cursed, stumbling back into the vehicle as the door slammed shut. In a blur of movement, the sedan roared forward and sped out of the lot, leaving the smell of burning rubber in its wake. Silence swallowed the space for a moment, broken only by Ms. Reynolds' uneven breathing. Employees who had witnessed the scene stared wide-eyed, whispering in shock. Mark, chest heaving, turned back to her. "They weren't here by accident," he said, voice low but certain. "If you had gotten into your car." He stopped, the thought too chilling to finish. Ms. Reynolds stood rooted, her phone slipping from her hand. For the first time in years, she felt genuinely vulnerable. And in that same moment, she realized something else: her life had just been saved by the man she'd always passed by without a second glance. The parking lot was still buzzing with whispers when security finally rushed over, radios crackling. But it was Ms. Reynolds who stood motionless, her heart pounding harder than any boardroom negotiation she had ever faced. She wasn't used to fear, not like this. For years, she had built walls of confidence and authority, a fortress that few dared challenge. Yet here she was, shaken to her core, and it wasn't her bodyguards or her polished reputation that had shielded her. It was the janitor. Mark lowered the mop handle slowly, as though realizing how absurd it must look, a middle-aged man in a faded uniform standing against danger with nothing but a cleaning tool. His hands were trembling, not from fear of the men, but from the overwhelming adrenaline that coursed through his veins. I'm sorry for shouting like that," he stammered, his voice rough. "But I knew something was off. I've seen that car circling the block before. Tonight, it wasn't just waiting, it was hunting." His words carried a weight she couldn't ignore. Ms. Reynolds swallowed hard, her sharp gaze softening for the first time since he'd known her. You noticed what even my security team missed?" she asked, incredulous. Mark nodded, his eyes clouding with something deeper, an old pain. "My wife, she didn't come home one night. Years ago. If I've learned anything since, it's that evil doesn't always announce itself. You just feel it." His voice cracked, and he quickly turned away, embarrassed to have revealed such a personal truth. The CEO, who prided herself on efficiency and results, found herself speechless. This man she barely acknowledged in the hallways had just confessed the kind of loss that no wealth could ever mend. And yet, instead of turning bitter, he had sharpened his instincts, using them to protect someone else. "Mark," she whispered, her voice steadier now. "You didn't just save me tonight, you saved my daughter too. She was waiting for me at home. If I had gotten in that car," she couldn't finish the thought. Her chest tightened as the magnitude of what almost happened sank in. For the first time, Ms. Reynolds didn't see Mark as just the janitor. She saw a father, a man who carried scars yet chose to act with courage. And in that moment, gratitude welled in her eyes, something money, titles, or status could never buy. The following morning, sunlight streamed through the towering glass windows of the corporate headquarters. Employees bustled in as usual, their chatter about quarterly goals and upcoming deadlines echoing through the lobby. But something unusual was happening in the center of the building, something that made people pause mid-step. There, standing in front of the reception desk, was Mark. His uniform was the same, but the way people looked at him was different. Where once he blended into the background, now every glance carried a whisper of respect. Word of the previous night had spread quickly, and people who had passed him by countless times without notice now stopped, nodded, or even offered a quiet "thank you." Just as Mark adjusted his mop bucket awkwardly, the elevator doors opened with a soft chime. Ms. Reynolds stepped out, not in her usual brisk stride, but slowly, deliberately. Her presence commanded attention as always, but her eyes softened when they landed on Mark. "Mark," she said firmly, her voice carrying through the lobby. "I want everyone to know what this man did last night. He saved me from stepping into what could have been a deadly trap. Without his vigilance, I might not be standing here today." The lobby fell silent. Mark's face flushed crimson, and he tried to shrink back, but she wouldn't let him. "You may wear a janitor's uniform," she continued, her voice thick with emotion, "but last night, you wore the armor of a hero. And heroes deserve to be seen." A ripple of applause broke out, hesitant at first, then swelling until the whole lobby was filled with the sound of clapping. Mark blinked rapidly, struggling to hold back tears. He had never asked for recognition, never expected it, but in that moment, the weight of his sacrifice, his loss, and his courage felt seen. Ms. Reynolds stepped closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "I want you on my personal security team. You've proven you can see what others miss. But more than that, you've shown me what loyalty looks like." Mark's throat tightened. For years, he had carried the grief of his wife's loss, working quietly to provide for his daughter. Now, life had handed him a chance to turn that pain into purpose. And as the applause continued, one thing was clear: true worth isn't measured by status or wealth, it's measured by the courage to act when it matters most.